So today we are going to be having a wonderful panel. I'm very excited about the people that are lending their voices to this very important discussion. And I'm going to be introducing them, and we'll do a panel discussion with them, some topics of discussion, and then we will do a Q&A with all of you if you have questions for them. So I'm going to start by introducing our first guest. Our first guest is a personality, a political commentator, a self-proclaimed military brat who has had his hands in a variety of different outlets. Having been a member of both college Republicans and college Democrats at North Carolina State University, his knowledge of how the government works, his keen sense of domestic and international policy, coupled with his love for Washington news, has made him a leading voice in this generation. He's the former chief political analyst for AfterBuzz TV and currently represents the 39th Assembly District as delegate for the California Democratic Party. Please welcome Drexel Hurd. And our next guest is a writer, director, and activist. His work acts as a bridge between people, stories, and policy, working together with organizations such as the WFP, UNHCR, the Peace Palace, the Noble Foundation, as well as many other NGOs and governmental bodies. He uses these stories as a tool to entice dialogue and to drive forward public policy. His recent and current work is focusing on girls' education in Eastern Kenya, the social and political implications of cannabis legalization in the U.S., and most deeply, his work has centered around the refugee crisis in the Middle East and the cultural reintegration into Europe. He's a graduate of Tisch School of the Arts at NYU with the BFA in Film and TV, and is the founder of Friendly Wolf Entertainment. Please welcome Dakota Lupo. Our next guest teaches in the departments of Comparative Literature and Gender Studies at UC Riverside, consults for BBC Media Action Network, and is editing 2 textbooks for Cannabis Publishers. She has previously taught in the Department of Philosophy at California State University, Los Angeles, and the Department of Comparative Literature at University of Delhi in New Delhi, India. Shortly after receiving her PhD from the Department of Comparative Literature at UCR, she began the Sorry Not Sorry project, which quickly evolved into a global movement that uses fashion as a tool to speak back to the rise of anti-immigration and racist discourse across the world. She's currently completing a book on terrorism, gender, and fashion. Please welcome Dr. Tanya Rawal. Our next panelist is a history curator, professor, writer, speaker, and social media influencer with a passion for Black history, social justice, and community organizing. He received his master's degree in Africana Studies with an emphasis in religion from Temple University. An avid lover and proponent of Black culture and digital engagement, he founded his radio show, The Corner, and launched his blog fusing his love for race, faith, culture, and politics. He has worked as a professor at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and Pacific Oaks College. He has written for publications such as the Huffington Post, Yes Magazine, Fusion, and has been featured in the Washington Post, LA Times, The Guardian, Ebony Magazine, and more. Please welcome Tyree Boyd-Pates. And our final panelist is a trained actor, writer, and national touring stand-up comedian who founded the coffee culture company Black Brew. Based in Compton, California, Black Brew launched shortly after the incident in Philadelphia where 2 Black men were detained for nothing more than relaxing in a Starbucks while being Black. Referred to as the FUBU of coffee, Black Brew's mission is to educate while celebrating Black history, Black culture, and Black excellence through a cup of coffee. Please welcome Karmel Humphrey. All right, so we're gonna get started, but just press the bottom of the mic so they're on when it turns green, because we don't want you to not. Yeah, we're gonna share a mic, yeah. All right, so when it comes to racism, I feel that there's a lot of, we were talking about this earlier, confusion as to what racism actually is. And we need to really break down what the definition of racism is. So I'm starting with a very simple question, and Tyree, I'm gonna start with you actually. What is racism? Hold it down. Yeah.
1, 2, and 2. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know what time it is because of daylight savings time, so I'm a little. But great to see everyone. The definition, of course, paraphrased, of racism is the belief that there's one group who is superior than others, and everyone else is inferior to it, by and large.
Great. Anybody other have comments on what racism is even to you or how you've witnessed it? Yeah.
I think the second part of that, the flip side, thinking that one race is superior, but it's the weaponization of the antithesis that the others are not and need to be known of that. That's really where active racism, I think, is, I feel, most prevalent and how it lives most in our common society.
Do you agree that racism comes from power as well?
I would say that it's integrated into into our infrastructure as well. So yes.
One thing that, hello everybody. One thing Malynda and I spoke about not even 10 minutes ago was part of today's conversation. We want to make sure that people really understand. There's obviously, 3 black folks up here and a lot of black folks out there. When we talk about racism, people tend to think that racism is only a black problem, and it's not. So part of today's conversation is something that we want to make sure that everybody understands, that it's not just about black folks in America, even though it is something that we see on television every day. From a political standpoint, in right now, we're seeing 2016 or 2015, what happened to black folks in 2015 happening to Latino Americans and immigrants in 2018. So these are things that we have to continue to talk about, and I know we're going to be talking about that throughout the discussion today.
So Drexel, since I do have you, let's talk about kind of the current political climate of the country right now. Since the election in 2016, we've seen a rise of hate crimes, and white supremacists have been emboldened, and we've seen a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric kind of intensified, so to speak. So when it comes to politics, how do you think, what measures do you think that this country needs to take in order to combat racism as a whole?
Vote. I always ask questions when I'm asked to be on panels, especially, the first question I always ask is, how many of you guys out there have voted? Everybody? Everybody, who's everybody registered to vote? If not, we can fix that. Well, I'll stop this whole thing right now. We'll get our phones right now and we'll do it with you. One of the things that we have witnessed over the past couple of years is the power of voting. And whether or not it is, we all like to think of voting as a national thing because that is what we see on television. However, we've got district attorneys across the country. Here in Los Angeles, there's a very prevalent Black Lives Matter group here in Los Angeles that is very vocal about the state of Black America in Los Angeles and challenges the district attorney and the chief of police and anybody else. So a lot of those positions are elected positions. There are a handful. I'm the only black delegate in the 39th district. So I think for us, one of the things that we can do is just get involved. Not only do you need to get out and vote, but you just got to get involved, and that is running for office, sitting on boards, joining Democratic clubs or Republican clubs, if that's your thing. And that's fine. And there's ample opportunity to do that. 90% of our elected officials across the country are white Americans, and that is not the America that we see now. And so if you want to see change, the first thing that you have to do is to get involved yourself. We saw last year where people were like, well, I'm not going to vote because I don't like Hillary Clinton. Well, let me tell you something. Compromise is what we do every day in our daily lives, in what we do in work. If you don't think that a politician is going to compromise, and one-issue voters are they're the worst. I'm just gonna say it. If you're a one-issue voter, there's an issue. Because if you can get 90% of what you believe in from a candidate, and 10% of something that you can't, because they have to compromise because they're in a district, something happened, you don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know what constituents they've talked to because you're not the only one, right? So then you need to look at that candidate and say, yeah, that's probably going to be the candidate for me. Oh, and I'm not going to vote, because once you don't vote, then we get what we have in the White House right now, and that's a problem. So, and now we're having a conversation about immigration when the last Republican president really touted immigration as a huge talking point of the Bush administration. Like, that was a big thing for George W. Bush, not in the way that Republicans are now, and they're talking about it right now. It was a cornerstone of the Bush administration to find comprehensive immigration reform. That didn't happen because Republicans have changed significantly. So, so that's the way we have to look at it. Is you got to get out and vote, you got to get involved, and you got to run yourself. Because if you don't, then I don't know what you're doing.
Anyone else? Karmel.
Yeah, I hear all that. But even when we talk about going back to racism, and I'll take that out some of politics, to me it's all about division. So when I hear Republican or Democrat, that's already divisive to me. So I totally get about going out and voting and doing something, but even before that, like, the change starts at home. The change starts in my community. The change starts with me. Like, the Asian demographic is the least voting demographic there is. I don't ever hear the same issues that we're talking about with black folks in the Asian community. Also, the Asian dollar stays in the Asian community longer than the black dollar does. So that has nothing to do with voting. That's them building up a culture inside their family, inside their own people, to build up themselves. Then we can start talking about voting and all that stuff. Because for me, if I don't believe in either option, I'm not going to vote. Now, if someone runs that I know, Drexel ran for something, I'm voting.
Me too.
So, for me, racism, politics, all that stuff starts internal. I can vote all day long. I can go to polls every year and keep voting and get nothing from it. But if I internally say, well, you know what, I'm going to do something different, or I implore my friends, my family to do something different at home, and then we start seeing something change in our community, that forces people to make a move. Whether you vote or not, I start there. For me, I start changing myself and my family, then we'll see what happens at the polls. Because I can go vote all day long, and to me, I don't see a lot of change sometimes. Because, yeah, someone might have 90% of what I want, and that 10% is the one thing I don't want to hear, or the one thing I don't want to do, or whatever it's Hillary or Donald, whatever, I don't care. Because honestly, for me, it starts at the house.
Can you turn the mic on for a second? Just hold it. I know you were loud enough. Let's stand up. You did sound great. Tyree, do you want to follow up with anything? Okay. Dakota, did you?
I think speaking, you mentioning immigration as an issue, and you spoke about the Bush administration. Yes, the Republican Party has changed, and yes, it didn't all of a sudden turn into using policies and divisive rhetoric to cover this possibly actively racist or inherently racist ideal, and I believe it's both. I feel that the thing is, though, and one thing that opened my eyes recently is doing a lot of work on the immigration crisis in the Middle East and in Europe. When you begin to go and look at the word immigrant, for me, being in Southern California and in the U.S., when I hear the word immigrant, I have to really focus on who I'm listening to, because that could be Mexican, South American immigration, or the majority of my work is immigration from the Middle East into Europe. And so I think when you begin to break down immigration and you take the race away from it, and you begin to think about what is causing these issues and what is causing these people to flee their homes with nothing but what they have in their pockets, if they have clothes that are not tattered enough to still contain pockets. And so when you think about that, then you begin to talk about policy that is race-based, but also policy that's economic-based, and policy that's, just through generations and generations of poverty, and how things begin to build up in many different places. And then you're actually having a dialogue, which I think that becomes important for the us, and I say us in this room, but the challenge becomes reaching past to those who are using immigration as a paintbrush to just say Mexicans, or immigration to just say people other than my skin tone. So I think that it's really important as we talk about these issues is to really not just say that the Republicans and Democrats, as you said, are speaking about immigration, but what are they really talking about on one side in terms of what they're covering up, and on the other side, well, what's the real issue? What's the real problem? And then you have rhetoric, like you have now, speaking about these violent criminals coming through from the southern border. Meanwhile, if you look at the reason why most people are leaving, it's less about them just trying to sneak up and get in and do some bad stuff. So it's really, so I think it really is important, for like you said, from when you're at home and when you are a young Hispanic male or female or you're a young Hispanic human being who says these people are being painted as X, Y, or Z, to really know at home, well, what's going on in our neighbors, and where's the education for people to really learn, well, why is there an immigration crisis? It's unfortunate that that dialogue is not popular. And I think the us in the room, that you're all here and there's an interest in that dialogue, I think the challenge becomes when we encounter folks who don't have that sense of really specific reasons and chain events and really understanding what's happening. I think it's our responsibility to begin to walk to the people that we don't agree with and to offer some of that idea. And I think so unfortunately, the burden gets put on those who are really trying and working and speaking, but I think that's a burden that we must carry, because unfortunately, I'll say, an other side tends to not even see the issue. They're just using the words.
When it comes to the media, though, how do you think that people should find factual information so they are aware of what the issues are when it comes to things like immigration? Because I know it's hard to know what's truth, because you can read one article that says one thing and another article that says nothing, and then you see a tweet and that's a whole other thing. So I'm curious, where do you find, all of you, if you want to answer this, find your information that's true? Drexel, you're laughing.
Real quickly, I just answer you very briefly. I think for me, it's believing yourself. I think if you're trying to believe somebody else, then there's a lot there, but you have to begin to create your own filter of what you stand for and believe in, and begin to have a personal dialogue, less than just listening because this person agreed with you on the other thing.
It's funny, I was only laughing because right before you asked that question, I was thinking about clickbait in my head. And I was thinking about how we get so trapped in clickbait and how we get so trapped in articles from 2011 that people are posting now. It's like people don't read the article, they just read the headline. And that's the problem right now, is that we're not actually reading the actual article. Now, you can debate whether or not, where it comes from. It comes from Fox News, if it comes from Fox News, if it comes from NBC, if it comes from the AP, you can hopefully decipher that for you. I think, to Karmel's point earlier, it starts in the home. It also starts in the school, because if you can't schoolhouse rock yourself, then there's your first problem. If you're not thinking about the actual how things work and history and things that you learned in school, that is your roadmap to how you should be thinking about the article that you're reading in that moment. If you can look back at that article and say, oh, that doesn't seem right, now I gotta go back to what history has taught me, because history repeats itself, and say, how does that factor up? And again, we just have to be very careful. Like, I see a lot of my friends, and they get really upset when they post articles that they have not read. And they're like, this is happening right now, especially the articles where you're like, this person died 2 years ago. And you're posting it right now. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So clearly, so if you're not thinking about those types of things, I can't imagine what people are posting that are, from months ago.
Yeah, and so to echo on that point, you mentioned infrastructure, you mentioned history. And so it's funny when we talk about immigrants fleeing a country where they're being persecuted and having a hard time. That's how this all got started.
He's coming. Here, he's passing. Yeah.
So now, the infrastructure that's set up is saying, oh, you want to do what I did, well, you can't now. Right? So that's what's funny, is that if his history is repeating itself, we have people who are fleeing a country, coming here to find shelter, and being told no. So that's racism to me. That's setting up a system where, okay, now I have what I want, and I'm going to keep it to myself. And anyone else that looks a little different than me, you can't have it.
I think I just want to point, it's not just racism, it's also classism. Because that is a huge part of what is happening. Like, I could be a wealthy black person and still look at somebody in a part of Los Angeles that is not well off and be thinking the same thing, because there are people like that. From Baldwin Hills is very different than Crenshaw. So, I mean, whether or not you're a white American looking at an immigrant that way, there are black folks that do the exact same thing to the exact same people. Latinos do the same thing. My husband's Puerto Rican, and I know Puerto Ricans, and there's some things that are going on. And I'm always really confused. But we see it within the races. So when we talk about racism, we're not talking about white folks versus everybody else. We're also talking about what's happening within our own community that's keeping us from helping each other. And
I
that's
add-
a problem.
Can I add to
One,
that?
two, and two.
So I think one of the best ways to answer what is racism is, has anyone in here been accused of being reverse racist? Has anyone?
For sure.
I have definitely been accused of that.
Yeah.
That can't happen, right? You cannot be reverse racist. Why can you not be reverse racist? Huh? So. There you go. It's an institutional thing. So the best way to answer, when someone says, you're being reverse racist, you'd have to say, no, I would have to, I'm getting this from an Indian comedian in New Zealand. He says, no, I would have to build a time machine, go back thousands of years, and tell white people that their skin color wasn't good enough, and have to bomb them back to oblivion every single time they started to build their communities back up. And I would have to build entire systems that relied on their very cheap labor, if that meant prison labor or slave labor, then prison labor, then slave labor again, whatever the system might be. So I think when we're answering this question of what is racism, it's best to understand that no one can be reverse racist because of how ingrained it is into our economy, into our government, which goes back to what you're saying, like voting is not always the easiest thing because it's so divisive, and we just need more parties. So please start another party.
Tyree, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Certainly. I have this really cool job where I get to be a historian for a museum. And at this place, I get to find out truths that were never really disclosed in classrooms. And one of my latest projects has been California's involvement in slavery from 1848 to 1865. And it's called California Bound, Slavery on the New Frontier. And in my studies, I was able to find out that much of our conversations of how we define borders and who gets to be kept in and who gets to be kept out has been an ongoing discussion that has only been advantageous to the white majority who really seeks to steal the land. I mean, it's always really back down to that. And what I'm finding out, moreover, is that this discussion of what is racism versus should be really delineated from what is prejudice, because I think oftentimes those two things are getting conflated, and certain groups feel that they aren't being racist when they're really being prejudiced, but their prejudice is being fueled by their racism. Does understandable? And I want to piggyback on her conversation because institutionally, we always have someone at the top. We'll always have someone at the bottom, and those who are at the bottom are the most susceptible to the pangs of racism, and I think we should consider them in this conversation as we have it.
So when we're talking about like institutionalized racism and systemic racism, what areas just in your lives have you witnessed it?
For me, education was the first place. In school, I was straight A student, I was an athlete, and I was still black. So for me, if anything of negativity came up, something was missing, I was blamed. Karmel stole it. I'll never forget being pulled into a principal's office, asked where a bottle of rubber glue was. There's 30 other kids in the classroom, but they pulled me out. I was seventh grade, and it was the first time I really felt all the things my mom and my dad had been telling me about that I'd never seen before. It just hit me all at once. I did everything right. I was, like I said, straight A student, I was an athlete, everyone liked me, I was funny, but something goes missing, let's blame the black kid. So that was the first place I seen it, and even my kids now, I teach them the same thing, like, look, you can do everything right, but you still have to be a little bit different. You have to act a little bit better because your skin tone just dictates that has to be the case.
Yeah, I think speaking, I think my education didn't entail the realization of the opportunity and the privilege that I had being white. And I think that growing up in a lower middle class town right outside of Queens, my high school was 40% white, 40% black, and 20% Hispanic and other races. And it was a really integrated community where there was less, there was racial understanding, but it was a really tight-knit, people were more focused on both their parents working and people having play sports and having a team and just getting by and doing what you have to do growing up very young. But even amongst that, I wasn't aware of necessarily the different rules that I would therefore get played by for the rest of my life than the people that I grew up with. And even now, I mean, you could even say, well, so-and-so is making more money, or this one is successful in this regard, or that. Well, it doesn't change the fact that it took me 30 years of my life to begin to understand not only the opportunities and the difference that I have, but then the responsibility to begin to spread that out. And I think that's something that is, it takes some time, and I feel like when you begin to come to the realization, sometimes there's a callousness that feels defensive, and I think that's what's showing up a lot now in this fringe, and unfortunately not so fringe idea of, well, what is a straight white man to do in the world with all this fake sexual assault allegation and all these minorities getting jobs now over him, because, and then it becomes this incorrect dialogue of unfairness, whereas I think that's something that being white in America is important to understand that as an ally to all races, because regardless of what you feel and think and what you feel in your heart, you are still walking outside this door in a system that I do get an advantage over. And I think that's something that as children, if you begin to understand that when you're older and more callous, you're less to deflect it out of a sense of fear or anger or whatever it may be.
I think one of the things that some of us, I'm sure most black folks in here can identify with, is if you speak well, they generally say, well, you speak great for a black person. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What does that even mean? And listen, Malynda made earlier, during when she was reading off my bio, said that I'm what did I say? You say self-proclaimed military brat? No, I am a military brat for sure, 100%. But so I grew up in a completely different world than a lot of folks did, and we talk about it often. We do talk about racism and or just racial things that are going on in the world with our group of friends, because my world was so different than everybody else's, because I grew up with nothing but a mixture of people, but that did not mean that growing up I did not get the same things. I was a straight A student. I was class president and things like that, and people were like, oh, you're going to be the first black president. Then Barack Obama came along, and I said, well, he screwed that up for me. And so like those are the like the small things that carried over time, because those are the things that we can all identify with at some point. But on the other side, my dad was a colonel in the Marine Corps. And he was one of 50 out of 500 colonels in the black colonels in the Marine Corps. And that's a lot for a kid when you know that your dad is one of like the few. And even though the Marine Corps is, thing is the few, the proud, the Marine, there's not, the few is the few. And that's and so that's something that I had to, watch over the years of my dad, trying to, as we all say, you got to be better than the next person. That is not to say that we are better. It is that we have to do twice as good as the next person just to get to that next step. And that is something that that we have to do, unfortunately, still to this day. And that we're, it's crazy.
I don't even know where to start when I first experienced racism. I can tell you when I first realized something, I knew I was going to do something about it, which was in 7th grade. I grew up in Louisiana, and we caught in East Baton Rouge Parish, and I went through desegregation. So I'm a little too young to have actually experienced desegregation, but it happened. And in this point, Louisiana decided it didn't know what to do with immigrants. So there was 2 categories. You could either be black or you could be non-black. And I'm not kidding. It happened. And what the problem with this was, like, myself, my really good friend Jeff, who's a Nigerian, we all got thrown into the non-black category. But our teachers treated us very much like we were not white. And so I think from that point forward, a good handful, 30 of us, have been extremely close-knit since and have been wanting to do something about it. But yeah, when I'm talking about the infrastructure of racism, it's so deeply embedded in schools, and we hide it now because, like, it's based off your neighborhoods and whatever. to desegregate. They were taking kids from one neighborhood and throwing them 50 miles away. And the way my school got desegregated was it took a, quote, black school and added a gifted and talented program to it, which was predominantly white, because the test to get into the program was expensive, or you had a very long wait list. So they took all the gifted and talented program and put them in this school, and then everything was separate. We had separate prom queen and king. Not kidding. We were only allowed to take languages together and play sports together. The gifted and talented kids, which I was a part of, we had books that we could keep in class and take home, whereas the regular students, as they would call them, were only allowed to have books in class. They could never bring a book home. So that is how strategic it is. They set people up to fail. And we knew what was going on, and we had to have lunch together and face each other, knowing that we did not have access to the same resources within the same buildings. And it wasn't easy, and there was a lot of anger on my campus for 4 years. So, yeah.
Well, one of the few experiences, when I say few, there were actually a lot of interactions with racism, would happen to be through my religious life, actually. After being very interested in understanding Dr. King's civil rights involvement, I knew that his desire to combat racism was fueled by his faith. So I wanted to understand this even more acutely. And having gone to school and coming back, I came out of grad school in the thick of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I remember after Ferguson occurred, how mum, my predominantly black church, was about police brutality and holding that accountable. But then out of anger, I left that church because I felt that if the black church can't talk about black issues, about how our communities are being mistreated, then I had to find one that was probably more multicultural and ultimately more sensitive. But then when I went to a predominantly white church, I found that that church was even more silent and was more willing to pray for the police than they were for the people who were underneath them. And so after that, I left the church altogether and sought to find counsel and redemption in other ways. But then I found ultimately my liberation inside of books, and I found it within Dr. Malcolm X's autobiography. And he talked about how traditionally the Christian church has always had an apathy toward racism, because usually it was always colluding with it. And I've sought now to really dismantle that aspect of faith, decolonize it, if you will, so that people can understand that Jesus isn't white. Again, Jesus isn't white. And as long as Jesus remains white to my people, the colonization and white supremacy will remain intact. So that is what I now counter on a daily basis, whether it be through history or on my knees, praying.
Amen. I do have a follow-up question for you. So how do you think that churches should approach this situation?
Well, Malcolm X has always said that the most racist part of the week is high noon on Sunday, because that is when America is the most segregated. So given that our churches are demonstrative of our segregation, by and large, they're going to be either all white, all black, or all of a particular group who is in that religious affiliation. So my encouragement is if all white churches do exist, which they do, that they do the personal work to dismantle that racism amongst themselves before trying to collaborate or really be missionaries to other countries seeking to remove the guilt that they have about their racial bias internally.
And Tanya, I have a follow-up question for you. Since you're you're still an educator, you're a doctor, you're a professor, do you still see within the education system instances where your students have been set up to fail because of their race due to like curriculum or anything like that?
Yes, so the UCR is predominantly made up of first-generation college students. I have a lot of students whose parents are I don't want to use the word illegal here creatively. No, I don't like documented. Just they got here in a creative way, so yeah, the access, the way that we impose English and requires students. I'll give you a story. I had a student. I was teaching at Cal State LA. I assigned them to read Sula, Toni Morrison's Sula. And it's a great book. It's short, fun read. She was so excited to read this book because it was the first book she had ever been assigned by a teacher where she had identified with a character in the book. And I really understood that too, because growing up, I still don't know, like Jane Austen's and all of it. I never liked reading those. I didn't do well in high school. I was not a straight A student. I got better in college, but high school I did not. And I didn't because the teachers were racist, and I didn't identify with any of the literature. I didn't identify with anything, the characters that we were asked to think about and think deeply about. I didn't want to think about Shakespeare. So yeah, I think there's so many canonical texts from other places of the world that are not the UK that need to be read and brought into our education system so that we can all start to change those media images in our minds and the way we, conjure up these ideas of people. It starts at a very young age, and then when you're most creative. So we need to read about those characters when we're younger. So yes, in the education system, they need to change the books.
Yes. And Tyree, since you are a historian on the panel, what have you seen that has been different from what you learned growing up and then what you found out on your own? I'm curious the discrepancies there.
Within books, within educational texts. Well, I found out, I been in LAUSD all my life, so if anyone else has been through LAUSD all your life, things don't change. and they're not going to change. You're unfortunately more of a number than you are a student, and I have a whole theory as to why that possibly is, but that's another talk. But given that the school books are traditionally written from a historical perspective that seeks to kind of be all-inclusive, you actually erase certain groups when you're trying to be all-inclusive, particularly when we know that we all live on indigenous land, but Native Americans only get like 3 little sentences in the beginning of the text. Then Columbus came in, and that's when America started. That is problematic, and that's usually what's occurred. But I think we get snarky when we hear how Texas wants to just erase enslavement in their textbooks altogether, and wants to replace enslavement and call former enslaved people indentured servants.
Or unpaid workers.
Unpaid workers are really interns. And when you have and it's funny, and I'm glad we get to laugh, but it's dangerous because you have a future generation who will become our next judges, our politicians, and police officers, who will believe that their fellow students or the people beneath them, their ancestors were just interns or indentured servants, right? And so I think we have to take a concerted effort. I'm so glad you're like editing textbooks, because we need her because ultimately her words end up becoming exhibitions in places like where I work.
I think what's important too is that, speaking as it historically, I think part of the problem, especially for my education, was that these things were history. Slavery was history. The Holocaust was history.
Sure.
And all these things, and grew up through the 90s where things were okay. And all of a sudden, in the past few years, I think there was this collapse of hope for everybody. Guys, and oh my God, what is going on? Well, you say this is what's been going on in the entire world forever. There has been governments which have overextended their hand. There have been people who are oppressed, and I think it's important that part of what we read in history is a bridge, because slavery went to Jim Crow, went to the Voting Rights Act went to the Civil Rights Movement, that wasn't that long ago. Right. And so to really understand that there are countries that have been around for 5,000 years that still deal with types of slavery and discrimination, that we're a very young country. So I think one of the problems is that we should learn that history is now. Like, that is a story of the yesterday of America. So I think that, once that ties in, makes you feel, wait a second, that the Trump administration is a symptom of something that is cyclical, that is not surprising, that is not so fringe. It happens everywhere all the time, even when you're alive.
Yeah. Karmel.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. I think when we, the narrative of putting it into history as part of the campaign, that labor was lost, and it was just transitioned into the prison industry, right? So it's not like, I think that the history part is very strategic, basically.
Should be Black Present Day Month is what it should be, not Black History Month. I feel like I think it's important because all the things we, well, I think, and all the things we focus on are current issues.
The rewording of
Changing it. Thanks.
Yeah, so
Karmel.
to jump on all that again about changing how we teach and the textbooks and all that, for myself, my kids are in public school. They've also been homeschooled. They've also gone to charter school. So I've kind of given them a full scope of what it all looks like. And for myself as well, I created a curriculum for them to teach them about Kemet. Because a lot of people talk about Egypt, not realizing it was called Kemet before the Greeks came in and changed everything. And so now when we talk about Egypt, we don't call it Egypt, we call it Kemet. And all the goddesses and then cities, it's not Luxor, it's Waset, all that is what it originally was called. Because for me as a kid, I always wondered about things in Africa not being African names. I always thought that was the weirdest thing. Like, the word Africa is not African. Why do we? Because someone came in and changed the name. So I think going back to the institutionalized and just even the nomenclature of things was set up by someone else. So for me, it goes back again to, at the house, I teach my kids, here's what it really was called. Like, I'm half Native American. I don't like the term Native American. And people trip out, like, why? Because I was Native before it was called America. So why call me a Native American? They go, what do you call you? We're Choctaw, we're Creek, we're Pawnee. That's what we're called. But someone else comes in and says, no, you're this now. Like, no, that's not my name. I can't call you Mike. You're Dakota, right? But someone came in and changed my name, and now we all think it's cool, right? Because someone else changed it, and now no one really discusses it anymore. So all you guys are saying is exactly what we need to do. Not just think about it's historically, that's gone in the past. No, we need to talk about it today, but start from the basis, the very beginning. And then, maybe we don't change it for everyone. Maybe it's a bit too much, but we need to at least have the discussion. And for my kids, they saw this firsthand as we went into a museum, and they saw a statue of Isis. My daughter called it Aset. And one guy stood next to her and says, how did you know that? And had this long discussion about Aset and all of Kemet, because this guy he was Arab. And he was just so enlightened that these young girls knew what that was. So that was confirmation for me. And also showed me that other people know what's up. But we don't want to talk about it because it seems too hard. We're going to go through all this trouble to start back. I'm doing it. I don't know what else is going to do, but for me and my house, my kids, that's what we're doing.
That sounds like some anti-colonial parenting. I like it. I really like it.
I love it. I love it. Tanya, you briefly talked about the prison system, so I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. And I know we're in a church, but I'm going to talk about the cannabis industry for a little bit, which where we know, minorities were traditionally punished harshly for marijuana offenses, and currently I feel like, and I could be wrong, the majority of people making a lucrative business out of it are white Americans. So Dakota, I know that this is something that you're very passionate talking about, and I'd love for you to just talk about the social and political implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was introduced to cannabis both politically and personally at a later age, I'll be honest, and that was something that I think was valuable because I think it becomes a teenage dialogue, but for me, it was a 20-year-old person's dialogue. And recently, I've been working a lot with different cannabis organizations, putting out stories, documentaries about the legalization process. And that opened my eyes to exactly what you said. We all know, it is true that there are much more disproportionately Black and Hispanic and minority groups that are arrested for the combination between cocaine and marijuana through from the 80s and the 90s to today is the same in terms of what class and color gets one drug and one offense and what is seen as the other. And so I feel like there is obviously a large push to realize that the legalization process will therefore, hopefully, because it's not a one-step process, invalidate some charges put against minority communities. But what you said is the exact, the challenge becomes is that the idea to change these things isn't for the understanding of what was wrong or what is incorrect or what was done out of a basis of a racist institution. What is seen as now is capital. How can I build my stocks because it's legalized? How can I broaden my companies that are only in legal states into non-legal states because it is legalized? Oh yeah, as well, let's put our campaign also on this fact that it will hopefully alleviate some sentencing for some Black and Hispanic people. But also my stocks are going to be rising. So it's this really tough thing that the largest megaphones and the biggest push for cannabis legalization at a federal level to even just bring the schedule down so it's not seen as something like heroin. Because right now, federally, heroin and cannabis are one and the same in terms of the scheduling. And so we all know there's some differences in many ways in between those two things. But the challenge is that those who have the loudest voice are unfortunately using something that it doesn't seem is their number one priority as something to push those communities to therefore vote in that direction. So it's really interesting to see, as I came in from the corporate side of, hey, legalization, let's explore this, and then to see not only are, I'll say minorities as Black and brown people in the prison system, but then you talk about minorities as in small businesses. There's a ton of cannabis companies that have built from the ground up with their bare hands, not being able to use banking, not being able to transfer funds state to state, and work the sweat and blood off their back to build these family-owned businesses. And now that corporations want to get involved, they're being ushered out because of the large-scale profit that can be made. So they're a minority in the business sector, and they're a minority in the class sector, where these small businesses have no chance simply because those at the top are not only using their capital, but they're using the minority's issue as their issue, because it's some sort of ancillary benefit that will eventually happen if step 1 gets to step 10. And so it's unfortunately convoluted, but I feel like the voices that have to be most heard are the ones that, again, we're here. And I say we because it's an important thing that you showed up, and just that is the first step. And I think that there needs to be a necessary discernment between cannabis in the prison system as a conversation in and of itself, period. Improper sentencing as a conversation in and of itself, period. The fact that it ties into cannabis legalization, okay, there's a bridge there, but the profits of what's really pushing that, I think, has unfortunately blown a little bit out of proportion.
Anyone else on that?
I mean, I just want to add to that. I think that there should be like a compensation packages for the small business owners that are now in prison for cannabis, right? Because they never got to start the businesses or push the businesses forward as they were already in the industry long before anyone is right now. So these huge cannabis corporations, I think, owe some compensation to people that need to get their sentencing removed, but then they also need to come out with some cash.
Obviously, as the political person up here, I'm just going to point out something that we talked about earlier, which was, there are a significant amount of district attorneys on the ballot. There are a significant amount of attorney generals on the ballot. Keith Ellison, that everybody knows nationally as, is running in Minnesota. And here in your state legislatures are very important. So these things that we're talking about in terms of how can we get compensation for these people, that has to start in the state legislature. That has to start with the district attorney. That has to start with the attorney general, because those are the ones that are either going to prosecute or they're going to help. And you want the district attorney and the attorney general to be on your side. So then you can go to the state legislature and say, hey, the district attorney's on my side, the mayor's on my side, the attorney general's on my side, and now we've got some legislation to back it up to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. I used to sit on the North Hollywood Northeast Neighborhood Council, so if you are in an area that has a neighborhood council, you should join, because then you get questions. This is right before January 1st of this year, that we had somebody come in and ask us about his small business and what the state of his small business would be, whether or not the ballot measure passed last November about the legalization of marijuana, starting January 1st of this year. And we had a long conversation about that. Karmel brought up earlier about black-owned businesses and supporting, community-based businesses. You see a lot of those people. If there is a black-owned cannabis business, you should probably support it. There's a Latino, you should probably support it. Support something that you know is going to give back to the community. And I think we just have to incentivize those small businesses better, so that they can grow better and they can give back to the community, because that's what they're going to do. If you know better, you do better, as Maya Angelou used to say. So, that's something that we can do, is just put pressure on your legislature. Because if you don't know who your state, we're about to move, so I had to look up who my new state assemblyman's going to be. I bet you not a single person in this room, unless I've got to see a friend, knows who their state assemblyman is. And if you don't know that, then how are you supposed to know how to get some of these measures passed? And that should be the first priority when you move somewhere. You just don't, yes, we want to circle the D next to the name on the ballot, but do you really know that person? Do you really know the name of that person other than the flyer on them? Because I can tell you, a lot of the folks in the Valley, Bob Hertzberg and Tony Cardenas, and a lot of these guys in the Valley, they're out there. They'll show up. But you got to find, you also have to know them as well as they know you. Because they're doing the work. And if you don't show up, and like you guys have, then they can't do for you what you expect them to do. And that's something that we have to remember.
I think what you said about, this is a particular issue that is ultra important to get involved in, because it is a changing issue. And there are historical contexts that you look back to when cannabis was first made illegal. That was also a corporate, there was a lot of issue with the whole reefer madness push of this a fringe drug, but also the lumber industry needing something to push the hemp industry out so they can begin to monopolize paper and wood and building materials. So you look at from a specific corporate standpoint, and that has been dormant. And I think the one other thing that's most important, you speak about speaking at community meetings and knowing your state assemblyman, is because there's a specific dialogue shift to what cannabis is, where 20 years ago we still had that idea of this minority fringe, I'll put it in quotes because the idea died, but that reefer madness idea that this is something so far out that the medical industry had to push to get to a point to where there are children with seizures that are having less of them, and people who are going through chemotherapy which are having better days in chemotherapy. And so all of those things had to push past racism, so it doesn't only affect those communities of which it diminishes, but it also affects the ancillary companies that can build. But it's also a social issue. There is, at an older generational level, cannabis is something that you take with you as, I saw it as this when I was in my 20s, and I kind of see it as this the rest of my life. So those dialogues are super important for you to reintegrate what's changed and reintegrate something from a different level that tends to get lost in the up or down vote, the DNR vote, the cannabis legalization or not. Well, that's not just for 20-something kids who just want to have a good time and be able to go to the 7-Eleven and pick up a joint. That's not, but very much socially. Well, in certain circles, it is seen in that way. I mean, if you ask because he is our Attorney General of the United States, ask him his opinions on cannabis, and they may not be so steeped in policy or truth or fact, but specific ideals that are not necessarily what he's really talking about. So that dialogue is important because it is his current opportunity to learn, and that doesn't happen unless there's a side that offers tangible details to teach.
Yeah, Tyree. Oh,
Okay.
Tanya, go
I
ahead.
just going to add that I think that what we're going to see with this cannabis issue in California and across the country is it's going to really show that the most racist, the most sexist, the most classist person in this country is not Donald Trump, is actually a corporate person, right? Any corporate person. The fact that we have to share our personhood with these institutions are going to become more and more apparent moving forward with the cannabis issue. So I'm really glad that this is happening. These conversations are coming forward now.
And I just want to advocate for those who are inside of prison cells because of the policies that were put forward, and that I don't think that these corporations and any individuals can make billions and billions of dollars doing what 10 years ago black men and brown men are now in prison for almost for life for. So until they can go free, no one should be able to make as much money as they have made. So because I'm all for abolition. With that being said, and wanting to take your thought about how racial marijuana has always been, it was way back in the 30s, if you're not familiar or like to watch old films like I do, there was this myth that if white women took marijuana, that it would make them want to sleep with black men more regularly. This is all codified. And there was a belief that if they were able to prohibit that, then it would stop the miscegenation in the interracial marriages or the potential of interracial interactions between those two groups of people. So then the criminalization and the propaganda that would come out, which we have now found out isn't true. Even DARE has actually had to change its designation of marijuana as a potential gateway drug and remove that all from the ways in which it was shared in classrooms, right? So we have to consider that there was a political propaganda made to racialize marijuana so that black and brown people could never participate in its commodification. Simple. And in that commodification now only benefits the group who's penalized those people for all the time. But I think that after all it's said and done and the dust is settled, marijuana won't even be the conversation. The opioid crisis will be. And this opioid crisis is only showing us that who are really attached to the drugs that we're penalizing and criminalizing and who really isn't, and how we have disproportionate feelings about certain groups based off what we think will make us feel like them at the end of the day.
I just want to piggyback on something that you said earlier, and something that we talked about earlier about how it's like Black President's Month, whatever. Because what you're talking about in terms of the rhetoric and in terms of what, like, that's something that came up last year. I don't know if you guys remember this, but Governor LePage of Maine said those exact same things last year about the opioid crisis, about why there was an opioid crisis in Maine at that point, and I'm sure he would say the same thing about marijuana. And he was saying that there were deaths because black men were crossing the Maine border and coming in and sleeping with white women. And I was like, this is stuff that happened in 2017. So what you're saying is like, yeah, that was history, but that was actually last year. That was like months ago. Right.
Now I'm going to shift gears. And before we get to Q&A from you guys, I'm curious, since we're in this world of social media and we're now being quickly informed when there are instances of racism and police brutality, and anytime somebody does or thinks anything offensive, it's a headline before it even happens. Do you think that we're getting to a point where we're desensitized by it, or do you think it is truly bringing more awareness to have change?
I think we're being hypersensitized to it. I think people are becoming more enraged. I think people are getting more aggressive. People are getting more upset about things that, yeah, a lot of stuff has been always going on. I mean, there's, not that it's not okay to speak up and show it, but we've all dealt with this for years. I mean, it's not like anything new. And sure, someone being killed needs to be spoken about, but like I keep getting shown the same image over and over and over again. It's bound to make me act and think a certain way. For me, I almost feel like it's an agenda to actually make me react. I think a lot of this is it's also picking back on the gun issue. Like, so if I get people all riled up and they want to go out and fight and shoot and start acting wild with guns, now I can shut down the guns because look how you're acting with the guns. You're not being responsible. So, well, you know what, let me take that away from you. So I think what we're seeing in social media, and it's also with clickbait, as you mentioned earlier, we see stuff and don't take 2 seconds to look at the URL that's got some crazy letters and numbers on it. We just see some crazy image in a headline, and I want to go riot. I want to get crazy because something I saw 3 seconds on Facebook, it didn't take 5 seconds to actually look at the URL. Or actually, if you go to some of these sites, it says there's a disclaimer, this is a satirical site. It's all jokes. But someone posted like it's truth, and now I want to act a certain way. Now I've already taken that and made a judgment call about this person, about this race, about this group of people, this company, whatever, from something I saw on a tweet or on Facebook or on Instagram or YouTube. So to go back earlier when we talked about where you get your information from, go back to books. Go back to talking to people who lived those things, experienced those things. If you have someone in your life that's a grandparent or great-grandparent that's actually been through those things, talked about what they saw, ask them about it. You see something on Facebook or Instagram, I honestly don't believe anything even my mom posts. I don't care who it is. If I see it, I'll take it. Okay, I'll go read about it and find out and come back and talk about it. But I think it's an epidemic on how much. I think we all get our news from Instagram and Facebook. I think anyone actually watch CNN. Because, like, it's funny, CNN will tell you to go to Twitter to look at their news. I'm like, wait a minute. I came here to look at the news, right? Why are you telling me to go to Twitter? So I think you have to be really careful with social media because I think it's causing a lot of the issues and some of the emotions we feel about people in life in general, and a lot of it's not true.
I think we're in a really interesting growing phase with media. We're at a point where everybody has a camera. Everybody can be a journalist. And we need that. We need to not have the media industrial complex. Even, we have our right-wing media, we have our Fox, we have our left-wing media, I guess. Who is? MSNBC, and then we have this thing called Vice, which is supposed to be our liberal left, which is not, because it still runs by HBO. So any media outlet that seems like it could potentially fall into your politics is not, because it's still owned by a really old white guy, and that's just the truth of it. And so what we need to have is, and I think we're getting there, and it's kind of had some weird, horrible tangents, but we're getting to that point where people can start sharing information ethically and truthfully and sharing their stories, and hopefully we'll get to that point where we don't have to rely on corporate-owned media. And I think we just have to be patient and get through this phase of Instagram and Facebook and maybe be leaders in changing how Instagram is used and how Twitter is used and how the internet is used. And that's something as an educator I do have to do. I have to tell students that you can in fact get on the internet and not look at cats or play games, and you can share information ethically. So yeah, I think we're growing.
I tried personally not to get in social media arguments. It makes my head hurt. Sometimes Malynda will text and she'll be like, "You got to see this," and I'm like, you know what? I can't get involved in that because that is too crazy to me. I do when it's when it bubbles up. You get to that point and you're like, you know what? That person really just doesn't get it.
This comment thread needs a mic drop.
Really needs a moment. But something I said. I was talking earlier, I always talking about clickbait earlier, because there are the friends that post the clickbait the most are the ones that do nothing. And we spent so much time in 2016. I would tell my friends, a lot of my friends were Hillary Clinton supporters, a lot of my friends were Bernie Sanders supporters, and I would tell my friends all the time, well, there's a lot of arguing going on, but I don't see you doing anything. I don't see you out there joining boards, especially, I was a Hillary Clinton supporter. A lot of my friends, and I'd be arguing with Bernie Sanders, and I'd be like, what are you doing? You're talking to me on Facebook, and I don't see you lined up, joining a board somewhere, trying to make the change within the party that you seem to want to happen, because it doesn't work like that. I'm getting what I want out of the party, but what are you getting out of it? And so when we're arguing, we just have to be very careful when you're arguing on social media or that you're looking at social media, because the most that I get out of social media is if something happens with Delta and I tweet at them. They will respond because they don't like that. They don't like to be called out on social media. So that is the power of social media right there, right? But we also saw 2 weeks ago, Taylor Swift posted about Tennessee and Governor Resident, who's in Tennessee, and he is in a very tight race right now with Marsha Blackburn. So go vote if you're in Tennessee and you're watching this on social media. But literally thousands of people signed up on social media because Taylor Swift posted on social media. So there is an opportunity for us to use social media for good if you use it properly, and if you're not just sitting back clicking like, because we can see those likes. And people try to pretend like we don't see the likes on Facebook and Twitter, but if you like something, we can see it. If you like something racist, we can see it. If you like something something says on Twitter, we can see you. And I tend to say to people, I can see you. Because if you're not calling those people out, they'd be like, well, I didn't know that you could see that in 1,000 likes here. And so, but at the same time, if you can make a post, you can go to a meeting. If you can take the time to do that, you can join San Fernando Valley Young Democrats. You can join Los Angeles County Young Democrats. You can join Black Democrats of Los Angeles. You can join all those groups that are available to you. Not only are they available to you, but you're helping out your community at the same time because now you're advocating on behalf of your neighbor who probably could not make that meeting. And you can use that on social media when you post on social media about the next meeting that you go to, and like use that for social media instead of playing Candy Crush, which I actually never played before. But like instead of using that, there are opportunities to do that. Do what Malynda's doing. Bring a bunch of people together. Malynda, last year, 2 years ago, we sat in Malynda's living room and had a similar conversation about what was happening at the time, about stuff that was happening 2 years ago, 2015. You know, so you can have those conversations. You just cannot be afraid. People do not like to talk about religion and politics. This is the time. Thanksgiving is the time. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks. The general election, first of all, if you guys don't remember this, 10 years ago today, Barack Obama was elected president of the United States for the first time. Then he won again, bigger. So this was not that long ago. And the general election of 2020 starts on Wednesday. So those conversations that you're having on November 22nd and December 25th, those are important conversations to have with your family. Those are important conversations to have with your friends. And do not be afraid to have those conversations to not have any kind of problem, because we're already in a problem. So, you know, whether or not you're arguing, whether or not you have to unblock those friends from 2016 election, you gotta unblock those friends. They gotta come back because they gotta hear what you gotta say. It's time for them to listen because they were wrong in 2016, and now it's time for them to correct the course in 2020. So, you know, help us correct the course on Tuesday, and then help us correct the course again as we go into this. And I will say this because as we go into the general election, I just want to blanket tell everybody this. Do not choose your candidate when they announce over the next couple of months. We have till June 2019. No, June of 2020, sorry. You got 2 years to select a candidate that we like. You got 2 years to do that. But let me tell you, there are candidates that are going to come out November, late this year. Elizabeth Warren's already on the train, right? We've got some candidates that are going to come out in April. Hillary Clinton came out in April of 2015. The time is coming. Just don't choose your candidate now. Because there are a lot of candidates that we like, but we're not going to know who is going to be the Democratic. We already know who the Republican candidate is going to be unless something crazy happens, which we will find out on Tuesday if something crazy is going to happen. You know what I mean? Listen, Maxine Waters is not going to slow down. She is not slowing that train down. And so we don't know who the Republican candidate is going to be in 2020 actually after Tuesday. So, you know, just be mindful of that as we go into these next few weeks when you're having those conversations with friends on social media, because what's going to happen is somebody's going to latch on to an old candidate. I just saw a post about Hillary Clinton running in 2020. Let me tell you what's not going to happen in 2020. Hillary Clinton's not running for president. So if you ever see that article floating around that just happened last week, I don't know where it came from, don't believe that shit. I mean, sorry, Lord. Don't believe that. But you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to happen. She's not going to run. But the same thing goes for any candidate that has previously run as well. Do not get latched on to somebody that you have already liked, because that may or may not be the candidate that we put forward in 2020. So just be mindful of that.
I think there's something to add on to that. I think what's important is the unblocking those friends from 2016, because the one thing I remember is I don't like to get in. I use social media as something to put out, but I realize that social media is, I mean, the only people that could read your Instagram post have to be on Instagram. So your audience is this person. So I think it's getting off that into the world, which is the most important part. But when we just choose not to speak about religion and politics and Thanksgiving, when we choose not to speak to our friends because we don't want to deal with it and it being the conversation, I think we lose an opportunity to therefore allow people to learn the things that they might not have had the opportunity to learn. And if you see somebody post something that is clickbait, something about a person who is going to post something not factually correct is probably quite impressionable. So they're a perfect person to imagine if you gave them facts and substance and humor and connection. They're willing to put their personality behind something they haven't vetted. So I think that instead of it being this us against them, there shouldn't be arguments on Facebook. There should be compassion to say, well, this person landed here, and that's far from where I am. So what can I offer them so we could land in at least a similar ballpark? And so it becomes about dialogue. I was conflicted what to post after the election. because the emotionality of it, when it comes to me as a political junkie, goes away. It's about how this game works. And what I posted about the day after the election in 2016 was, hey guys, there's a midterm in 2 years. And we all have an opportunity to do something with our vote, with our one token we get to put in the box and say, hey, here we have it. So I think that the thing is that what happens is we have 2 years until 2020, but people are going to procrastinate. And on Wednesday, after this midterm, whether it goes good, bad, or indifferent, people are going to say, oh, well, we have 2020, and then people forget. So I think it's important to remind people what happened in 2016, how they felt. Remind people of the amount of friends that they've lost and people that they stopped speaking to. Remind them of who they were before and after that election. And you have an opportunity to redo 2 years ago every 2 years. And I think that's something that's very important, that we can't do that alone. We have to do that with those we disagree with. So I think it's important to offer that olive branch on social media to those who you think you have shut down, but give them the chance to get to where you are.
All right, I want to open up the floor for any questions you may have. So if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, I'll come down with the microphone. Anyone, don't be afraid. Yes. And stand up, please.
Hi, I'm a fourth grade teacher for LA Unified. I am not going to defend the district at all. I could talk to all of you personally for hours. I would love that opportunity. But what I don't really have a question. What I have is I want to offer some encouragement, because I know Malynda, but I don't know Drexel. But I read every comment that you put on social media on Malynda's posts. And it has changed my teaching since Ferguson. I started really reading what people are putting out there. And I've started shutting up a lot more in my black and brown classroom and letting the students be the teachers and talk and bring their personal experience and listening to them more and allowing them to be bringing in what they know and asking their families to bring in what they know. And for me to be just a facilitator more and not the teacher. I've also bought many more books with different perspectives, because in the 15 years I've taught for LA Unified, the curriculum has changed a lot, and it's gotten a lot wider. It hasn't gotten more diverse, it's gotten wider, because the powers that control the district are more corporate. We've gone from elected leaders to more corporate leaders, and it's gotten wider. And so now I've gotten grants and brought in more books from different perspectives. And all of that is because I have been educated by people of different perspectives on social media, putting it out there. People I never would have met in person, not necessarily would have met in person. So I just want to encourage you that although there's a lot of negative side effects of social media and there's a lot of clickbait, the comments where people take the time to comment and say, well, this is my opinion on that, or this is clickbait, because people are reading those comments, and it is, I think, educating people overall.
Very, very briefly, I just wanted to recognize your shirt, which says, nevertheless, she persisted. I think that's an amazing example. Yes, that's an amazing example of something that was put out negatively that became positive and strong. That was Senator McConnell speaking about Elizabeth Warren, not shutting up when she was told to be quiet, and in a very negative, demeaning way said, nevertheless, she persisted as the authoritarian white male in the room of the Senate. And that became a rallying cry. So yeah, nevertheless, she persisted. So I think it's an amazing way, and that shirt is a great example of something that has become so powerful that was used as a weapon to begin with.
Hi, I'm really glad that you brought up the comment that we should not let Thanksgiving go to waste as an opportunity to talk about, not just religion, but politics, because I'm usually the one that always wants to do that. But where at my usual Thanksgiving event, I am encouraged not to engage the one white supremacist that will be in attendance. And so I'm just curious if, and so I'm really encouraged for everyone to talk about, yes, no, we should be talking about these things, and yet everyone else in the room at my Thanksgiving will not want me to engage. Now, of course, there's many different ways to engage, right? Sometimes there's dropping seeds. Sometimes it's not the right time to engage with some people at the actual Thanksgiving table. But what advice or what comments can you offer up to when you've got someone in your midst and who will, you'll keep bumping into from time to time? What is the best way to engage?
Sure. First of all, thank you for following all the crazy things that I say on social media because they're a lot of fun, and I don't engage often. But you know, we try to do our best on social media to make some sense of things. I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, and we teach kids all the time to, if you have a problem with somebody, you take them aside, right? And the fact that we can't do that as adults now because we have to engage in this public display of machoism or whatever we're doing, I think that might be an opportunity for you to, if you feel strongly about somebody in your family, you don't have to talk about it at the dinner table unless it's brought up. That's when you have to defend everybody else that cannot be defended. If it is not brought up and you still have a problem with somebody, you know, you're in the kitchen washing dishes with that person probably. Be like, hey, you know, I really saw you posted that. I really have a problem with that, and I just want to take time to say my piece about it. Don't do it because that's when people get defensive, is when they feel that they are about to get attacked. And the only way to change somebody's mind is when they are in a non-defensive situation, because they not only have to feel like they have to defend themselves, but their beliefs at the same time in front of other people who may feel either similarly or different than they do. And that's not a position that we want to put people in. That's why people get in social media fights, because now they've got a public forum to be called out on something. That's why I said earlier, companies don't like to get called out. People don't like to get called out either. And that is when things go the wrong way. So if you're sitting at home and you're having a conversation with somebody, don't feel like you have to do it publicly or amongst your family unless you really feel strongly about it, or unless it's brought up, or in this case, like I said, just pull them aside and have that conversation with them. Because I can tell you, when I talk one-on-one with somebody, it's very different than when I talk in public with somebody, because they're more willing to listen to your side, because you can drop facts on them, because nobody likes to be called out with facts. Because then in that moment, they can be like, you don't know what you're talking about. Because then now it's your word against theirs in public. But if you're private with them, they'd be more willing to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying in that moment. And then they might go back and look at something else. They might take the time to go back and research something that they saw on Fox News that may or may not be the right thing what they did not know to be the truth. You know, we could talk about these caravans all day. We know that's not the truth. And they can go back and look at that stuff, and you can have that conversation with them in private.
I have homework for you. There's a really great book, Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide. And in this, his argument is that you can either choose to be reactionary or revolutionary. And he was a Black Panther. So I think the best thing to do at Thanksgiving and Christmas is to not react, to know your politics and to stand in that and be the revolutionary voice always. And because we're right, it works, right? And I think if you read that book before Thanksgiving, it might give you the strength to do that, because it can be hard, right? Like to always have to stand in your politics. And if you know the facts before going into Thanksgiving, and if you have things that you, like, you know, it's just certain, like you said, like just have the facts at your fingertips, it works, because you can't shy away from that. But yeah, I think the best thing to do is to not react, to not take the back step. Like don't step, you know, just stand forward and stand with your shoulders back and be the revolutionary voice at the table.
So I will say a lot of it has to do with, we get an opportunity at Thanksgiving, Christmas, this the holiday season, we get an opportunity to hang out with that family member, with that person we don't see throughout the year. So my question is, why don't you? Why not see them before Thanksgiving? Why do we have to wait till the holiday season to hang out? And then, yeah, now it is kind of tense to bring up, you know, what someone posted on Facebook while dad's cutting the turkey. You know, you probably want to bring up like the Indians being killed while someone's doing the prayer. It's not the best time, you know. But why not in March? Why not call someone up for coffee in February? Why not in August? When you see them post that thing, don't wait 6 months later to say something. You see it, say something then. Call them up. Hey, yo, let's go get some coffee. What are you doing for lunch? That's usually what people want, is to connect. So we wait till Thanksgiving and Christmas to connect, and then we don't see each other again for 9 months. But if you had that thing lingering in your mind about, oh man, I want to bring up this social issue, this injustice, and then you think, yeah, you're going to be conflicted because now is really not the best time. But when the situation, the conversation does come up at Thanksgiving or Christmas, yeah, you don't shy away. You go ahead and say what you need to say, but don't be overly aggressive and come in and start like ripping the present out the kid's hand. Oh, this is all, about communism and this and that and socialism. The kid doesn't want to know about that. He just wants the game. You know what I'm saying? So like, do the things you want to do before Thanksgiving, before Christmas. Go out and hang out with your family before the time where it's probably not the most, appropriate time, because then you'll start building that bond and that bridge then. So come next Thanksgiving, you can really just eat. All right.
I think it's also something that is important is to listen and hear them out, because I think that if you I call it the kid in the back seat theory. When you have a child in the back seat of the car and you say, well, the sky is blue. They say, why is the sky blue? Well, the reflection off the water and all this stuff. Well, why? And all of a sudden, if you keep on going, they keep asking why. You begin to go a layer deeper and a layer deeper. And I think that sometimes people don't do well with factual information that is a concrete answer antithetical to how they feel. Especially if they're angry, if they're racist, if they're fearful. So I think if you begin to peel those layers back, you end up realizing that it may not be in the same way, but you guys might both be afraid of the same thing. You guys might both be angry at the same thing. And I think that leaving them with a question, letting them think, because if it boils down to they feel like a certain race is more subhuman than another, then you can't really fix that with a comment. And that's a question that maybe they're better off sitting with the question of why they feel that way, less than you saying, well, people are all the same. Happy Thanksgiving. I think it's really hard to deal with when maybe you were born into a place where you don't really feel that. And I think that's something that would be important, is that you're resisted for a reason. People are angry and hateful for a reason, and I think sometimes allowing them to express that and finding out why, not only for your own curiosity, but sometimes there's questions underneath there that they haven't themselves asked. And I think that could be helpful, because the seed, like you said, is something that grows. And the question has an opportunity to find an answer. An answer ends with a period, and that's about it.
We have time for a couple more questions. All right, Andrew.
I'm a big believer that hurt people, and so I want to know any ideas for healing within your own community or the country as a whole.
I'll speak on my background. I've been teaching yoga meditation for about 10 years, and that's a word that has gotten talk about cultural appropriation. That's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother panel. But I think there's something to be said about whether you call it yoga meditation, whether it's Eastern, Western, whether it's therapy, whether it's mediation. There's something to be said about human beings in a group doing something that is communal, be it sport, be it breathing, be it gathering for religious purposes or spiritual purposes or dialogue, a game night. I think something that connects people in a way that is not opinionated is helpful. And I think sometimes it's about, well, I have an uncle who is he is as far right as you can get. And he and I get along at holidays simply because we're both the ones that care enough to talk about it. And the fact that he's there showing up to me and I'm showing up to him is enough of a connecting piece that what we disagree on is less important than the fact that we had a communal conversation. So I think that finding something to do, and I mentioned yoga simply because there is no one person that goes to yoga, or there's no one person that works out. And that's a place where we all find an equal challenge. We all are sweaty. We're all tired. We all don't want to be there for some reason. A group run. By mile 6, you probably just want to go to brunch by then. But what if you did one more mile together? Then at brunch, you all go, all of these people sat through that little bit of crap with me. And so I feel like there's a little bit of camaraderie in a group space. In a physical, I speak from physically, that there's something there that I play in a league soccer game that gets very contentious. But at the end of the game, everybody shakes hands and wishes well to the other team. So I think there's something about sport, game, physical activity that connects people in a way that gives us challenges away from the mind and gives us a physical challenge that you can't really deny the fact that you're tired. And I think that's something that we all get tired at some point.
So part of my background is I'm a stand-up comic, and there's nothing but healing going on at a comedy show, because laughing is the best medicine by far. And I bring up a bunch of issues that we're talking about on stage here. A lot of the comics come up and talk about their hurt and their pain, and just getting on that level floor that, yeah, we all have been through some crap, and we can look at it and laugh. We laughed about some couple things up here that's some real tough issues, but when we get to that point where, yeah, we all went through something, whether it's pain through a workout or a joke, I think doing things that are communal, doing things that are on a level playing field, it puts everything on a level playing field. Going to the gym. I go to the gym and see a whole bunch of people from 18 to 85, black, white, and everything in between. Something that all gets us together doing something, I think is the best way to get us to heal.
I agree with both of you, 100%. I actually just came from a race, and my team won first place. I'm a rowing team, so yeah, I think community, group sports, is one of the most healing things a person can do. And I just want to talk about the word healing for a second, because that is not a word that I was even comfortable claiming until January of this year, when I actually had to physically heal. I was in a surfing accident. And I think just knowing that, I think part of healing is actually acknowledging that you are doing it. And if you're going to a comedy show, know that it's healing. If you're going to yoga, know that it's healing. Because I had been doing yoga for years, but I never approached it as healing. I approached it as gonna kill my body in this hot yoga room right now. I think I probably could have been a lot further along at this point had I just recognized that I was healing and not seeing healing as me being weak and needing to heal. So, yeah.
I facilitate a book club at the last bookstore around Afrofuturism, and they have many other book clubs for whether it be horror or crime or whatever. But I love just diving into books and finding themes to explore with groups of people, and then we find that we may see the world through the same lens. So books tend to give me the best outlet, community-wise.
Maybe I just interpreted the question just a little bit differently, only because I assumed that you were talking about community as a whole, as in within the community, and how can the community heal? And maybe that, okay. Maybe, yeah. You can't heal a community unless it wants to fix itself. And we talked earlier about, or at least I mentioned earlier about, the way within the black community that we look down in the class system, and about how we look at other things. We can't move forward if we're not listening to our other black brothers and sisters, or our other Latino brothers and sisters, or Asian brothers and sisters, stuff like that. I have a friend of mine, he's a really close friend of mine. He is as radical black as they can get, and I respect him tremendously on things on Twitter. I disagree with him on some things, but I understand his background, I understand where he comes from, and I understand why he believes those things. And until we can look at those conversations that people are having, that is how you start to heal, is if you start to understand where the other person is coming from and why they're believing within your own community. There might be somebody that might be super racist in your community, and that might be how they perceive things. But at the end of the day, they're still Black American, they're still Latino, they're still, so you just got to start understanding other folks and whether or not you're willing to do your part in fixing that for your community, because that's really important.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think the other thing too for your community is, and this is a famous Instagram quote, right? To be the person you needed when you were a kid, right? I'm sure we've all seen that one. I think that's really important, because things are not, there's no history yet. We're still living in these problems. We're still living in these crises, and there's still a little kid out there that was you that needs the strength that you can offer. So, do the individual healing and then bring it to your community.
So I'm gonna add one more to that. That's kind of way out of left field, but not really. When we talk about healing individually, a big thing I've seen in my family, my friends, is encouraging a better diet. And that seems kind of weird in terms of some of the social issues we talked about, but a lot of people are angry because their diet's jacked up.
That is so
I'm
true.
being completely honest. I have a friend of mine who's always angry. Come to find out I have a gluten allergy. So if you're always just tense and just riled up about something, and you realize it's something that you're eating that's causing you to be racist, it's just weird, but it's possible. It's very possible.
I think that is so true. And I think that actually goes back to one of the major crises we have globally, and that's the attack on farmers due to agribusiness and all of the pesticides and other things that in our food. So yeah, eat healthy and help your community eat healthy, because eating healthy is a privilege now, right? So organic apples are just so much more expensive than the others. So yeah, find ways to share food, healthy food, yeah.
We have time for one more question. All right. Oh, yeah. Actually, I'm going to get him, then I'll come back to you. So we'll do two more. There you go, 'cause
Earlier, you spoke about a few things, marijuana and with, right in the light, or with corporate control of the media, or now with diet, where things that sort of seem like they have the trappings of something that would be good, but because a lot of us, myself included, don't necessarily have the most nuanced or historically informed sense of how entrenched racism is, it actually reinforces the same racist power structures that exist, even though you think you're doing a good thing. What are sort of your smell tests when you're looking at something that sort of might seem on the face of it, this is a helpful thing, I'm making the world a better place, but then when you dig deeper, actually just reinforces the exact same structures, but has just slapped a new sticker on it?
That's funny you say that, because I had a conversation with somebody the other day about the Nike Colin Kaepernick campaign the other day. Because Nike, for all the good that Colin Kaepernick ads have done, and just in terms on its face value, right? There's something that everybody was like, thought it was revolutionary, and you're like, it's Nike. Right, like everything they do, everything they've done since Jordan, has just been revolutionary, right? And but come to find out that Nike is a huge supporter of Republican candidates. And so, so I'm having this conversation on one side with a friend of mine about why I thought that the ads were good for what they were. But on the other side, I'm thinking, but on the other side, there's a problem, the red flag on that. So we just have to be very strategic about how we talk about that stuff. You can talk about why it's important for Colin Kaepernick to have that ad, and why it's important for Black children in America to see that, whether or not it was him or Serena Williams or any of those folks that were a part of that campaign. But on the other side, call Nike out at the exact same time and say, but we see you, and we see that you're actually just making money off of what that is in the long run. Do what you got to do, but be truthful about it. And so the more that we start to, the more that you do your own kind of digging, the better off you're going to be. It took my friend kind of asking me the questions about how I felt about it to figure it out. Because I was like, let me just figure out what's happening. It all happened so fast. That night, that Colin Kaepernick thing happened so fast that I had to catch up to what was actually going on. And, I think that you trust your gut in that instance, where not everything in this world is, as they say, everything's not coming up roses, right? Like that's not the truth. And so from your own personal experience whether or not you need to look deeper, or that you're going to believe it at face value. In this, I take everything with a grain of salt. I think you mentioned earlier, you look at the headline and you read it, and then if you really still don't trust it, then you go back and do more stuff. And I think that we're in a time now where you don't have. It is a privilege to think you don't have to read past the headline, and so you always have to take everything that somebody says, put it, compartmentalize it, and then come back to it and figure out what really is the case. You just cannot take things at face value anymore.
Yeah, so, and I hope it doesn't come off sometimes that people like us, or I should say that, speaking on our behalf, that we're cynical. I question everything, I don't believe anything, 'cause my mom always says that, but you don't believe nothing. I said, well, I just question everything, I don't just take everything and just eat it, or I don't take everything and read it and believe it. Drexel said, I'll read something, I'll compartmentalize it, I'll wait, I'll chew on it, I'll come back to it. But I always use myself as the barometer. I'm the pH test. So if I see something and I try it and it affects me a certain way, then I can speak to it. If I never looked at it or read anything, I can't speak to it. Growing up in the church, I would always get taught about Islam. Islam is this, Islam is that, but none of us ever read the Quran. So I read the Quran. That's nothing at all what it said. So you have to go and just experience for yourself, and then you can speak to it. So in terms of the smell test, yeah, I will smell it, I'll touch it, I'll look at it a little bit longer. than most people probably, but then I'm now a resource. And people trust me because typically what I'm going to say is going to be factual. I'm not going to come out from any agenda or a slant. The whole Colin Kaepernick thing, same thing. Like, I'm a huge Kaepernick fan. When Nike did that thing, I'm like, this is kind of iffy, you know. But I wasn't just, Nike trying to make money or Nike's pro-black. It's down the middle. It's like, of course they're going to make money. It's a huge issue. It's smart. I get the business. And at the same time, I'm still probably going to wear Nikes, you know. So oftentimes, I'm just looking at what's the agenda. I get it. You all have something to gain out of it. That's cool. And if it doesn't affect me, all right, I'll move on. If it does, then I'll talk about it.
I think also we have to kind of shift. I kind of took your question to be like, what can you go and buy? Maybe it was because of the Nike comment, but like right now, yeah, I'd rather wear Nikes because of the Kaepernick thing, but I don't need to like buy brand new ones, right? Because then I don't need to keep buying a new pair every 6 months because there's still kids in Indonesia that are making them for like no money, right? So, and like with our phones, like do I need to get, there's another phone coming out again, right? Like in next month, XS or something? Is a sport one? I don't know. But like do I need, like, so do we need to keep buying the brand new ones? So there's this consumer culture problem too that like you can, the way we have to buy things, we have to like prioritize our politics. It's like, I'm gonna pick Kaepernick over the kid in somewhere else, but I don't need to keep doing it. I need to just kind of buy less things and have less things and, you know, spend more money on local food.
All right, and our last question.
Oh, stand up or? Okay. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you guys for this. This is great. It's been very educational. But I have a question. As racism has like been in our country for forever, and it's seemed to go in these ebbs and flows of morphing and changing and whatnot, how, as a person of color, can you continue without feeling hopeless? Like, my parents dealt with this, and now I'm going to deal with this. Now I have to teach my kids. You know what I mean? And it doesn't seem like there's ever going to be an end, right? Do you guys see an end to this? I mean, we can have these meetings all we want. We can go crazy on Facebook. I'm a Facebook warrior. That's what I do. But at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, a cop can still walk into somebody's apartment, say it's hers, kill the person, and she just gets away with it, or it's not. She won't be indicted or whatnot. That's things that we can expect to happen. We're just like, okay, we've seen this before because it's been happening for so long. So, how do you continue? How do you keep going on? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. Being a historian, my job is really hard, right? Because I've found out that racism is as American as apple pie, and that there will not be a solution for it until there is ultimately a dismantling of the system that created it. Oh, I guess. But that dismantling envelops everyone who's a part of it and benefits thereof, including myself, in various ways of privilege and, all those intersections. It's not going to get better. At the museum, I'll give you tangible examples, not to sound too so esoteric, but at the museum, I'm often told why my history exhibits are so dreary, because Black history should have the "We shall overcome," Martin Luther King at Miss Pettis Bridge, civil rights, and the like. But I'm realizing as a descendant of and a beneficiary of the civil rights movement that the gains have only been stripped away. And the conditions of African American people are actually worse now than they were before integration. How do you tell little Black kids that? Then you have to ask yourself as a historian, am I lying to the next generation, or am I holding itself accountable? And I would encourage to read The Case of Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's not going to be pretty. You're probably going to be crying like I did. But it's better to know what you're hoping for than what you're hoping at. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I can break it down. So many of us are hoping for things that won't ever come to be, when we really should be hoping for things that we can actually see. And many of us are reaching for pies in the sky, especially when it comes to race relations, that until there's a dismantling, we won't see it. And that job, and I have to leave on this note because it's important, I used to think, and I say this from a scholarly position, I used to think that the solution to racism was for black people to figure out. It wasn't until I realized through study and research that racism's issue is for white people to figure out. And when white people want to figure that out, then we can begin to truly hope. But until then, we won't.
I think there's
Says
a
James
kid
Baldwin.
in all of us, right? And there was at some point in everyone's life, whether you're not racist, you were not sexist, you were not classist, you were no ist, right? You were just a kid. And I really think that we can like nurture that more in youth with anti-colonial parenting, which I think you should write a book about that. Please, I want to read it because I haven't had kids yet. So, and I think that, are we going to change older generations? Are we going to change our peers? I don't know. Hopefully, maybe, could be great. But yeah, if we keep figuring out new ways to nurture that and hold on to that moment, I don't know, when we lost it, maybe you remember, but hold on to that like 3-year-old, 4-year-old hopefulness that just smiles at everybody and is just happy and is connected and doesn't see or care, rather. They might see it, they should see it, but they don't care about the difference. And we need to just hold on to that.
So I do have to do this last question, but he's the pastor of the church, so I can't say no to him.
Thank you so much for being here. This has been an awesome discussion. And as I told the congregation today, this is not the end of the road, it is the beginning. I really appreciate, the church to me needs to be anti-colonialism, right? Because too often the church wants to go in and save those who aren't white, as though white is the norm, and white is not the norm. We believe in a radical, subversive gospel. And so my question for each of you is, what would be the wow factor? What would be that moment where you go, I cannot believe the church just did that in a good way? Because this church, I'm pushing us through Christ to do that. So I would love to know from your standpoint what that might be as we consider how to move forward into the future.
Well, I can tell you the first thing that churches can do is not be tax exempt. No, seriously. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, churches across America are tax exempt, and they use that money. There's obviously the benefits of being tax exempt, but if you're going to use the pulpit to talk politically about things that you feel, then you are a political entity, and thus you lose your tax exempt status. So that would be surprising to me if churches were like, you know what, we'll let that go. But there are folks that aren't going to do that. You know, Malynda's always trying to get me in here, so this was her ploy. I saw, we see you. No, this has been great, so it's been good. And, you know, I grew up Christian and still believe in God heavily. And so that's not something that, I don't think I could be surprised. I think that I think that it's just a matter of if the congregation can get past its racist history, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I went to churches in Georgia. We used to live in Savannah. My dad would take us to the small church, and you know, you just don't know who if you don't know if you can't trust the people in your church, that's a problem. You know what I mean? If you can't look at the person next to you and think that they're going to vote in your best interest, that's a problem. And that would surprise me if everybody voted within the best interest of the congregation, because that's really what it's all about. We talked about Jesus earlier. Jesus wasn't white. And let me tell you, he certainly wouldn't be voting the way that some of these people are voting now. And so, you know, so you got the church not necessarily harm, just anybody, any church has to really think about what they actually believe in. Because then the only way for people to continue to believe is if they're reaping the benefits from that. And the only way they can reap the benefits from that is if your congregation is with you, not just from a spiritual way, but from once they walk outside the doors as well.
A wow factor for me, also having grown up in the church, is if the church literally read the Bible and did accordingly. I mean literally. And I mean the actual literal Bible, because even what we study today is not the original version. There's a version that has more books. But then there was a council that said, hey, you guys, we're going to take some of these books out and change the way it's. Go back to the original and do literally what it says. Because there are some things in the church that have nothing to do with the Bible. For a span of time, I called myself a Biblican, not a Christian, because I was living exactly as to what the Bible was telling me. I go into some churches where they sell coffee. Now, to some people, that's not a big deal. Like, why are you selling anything? Because if God is the God of all, you know, and the Bible says he's the cattle on 1,000 hills. I mean, he's got money all day, right? Why am I selling anything? Just give it away. Oh, we got to keep the lights on. Then you don't believe in God. Right? Everything in the Bible, go through it step by step and literally do what it says. It's a little different than what church is. So for me, that would be to be completely honest, your stained glass windows slightly offend me. Because as we said, Jesus isn't white. But that's just what church is, and I get it. It's not a big deal to me. I'm not going to trip out and start bashing windows. But I'm saying is, are we literally looking at what the Bible is telling us and then doing that? And in a lot of ways, we aren't. Starting from the beginning. I've taught my kids about the Bible and reading the Hebrew text and breaking it down. Teaching about how dark was here before light. They're like, what does that mean? Well, we're not taught those things. We're not taught about, was Adam the first person? No, it was the first story in the Bible about a person. But then why do we start talking about where Cain got his wife from? Because they weren't the first people. It's just the first story. Never had a pastor teach me that till I learned it for myself. So that's my biggest wild thing, is if the church went back and started from the beginning, original text, and taught people exactly how the Bible came to be and everything that's in it.
So I live in downtown Los Angeles, where we have Skid Row. And one of the most irritating things for me is to know how many empty religious buildings are in Los Angeles every night. And there are thousands of people on the street. So what would wow me would be to take these spaces and offer them to the people that need a roof over their head at night and a shower so they can get a job, so they can have an address to get a job. And I think just offering churches as an address to the homeless population would be that would be enough. Yeah, that would wow me, and I think that is something that is a growing problem in Los Angeles, and it's not going anywhere. And it would be great for churches to step in right now and do the work that it says it does, I think, in the Bible, right?
For me, I think something that, and this goes, as a non-believer, I grew up Roman Catholic, and that dissipated, and that I am firm and happy and joyful in my non-belief, and I think that's something that I find that what you said, the community integration, I think is something that's important, because a religious-based institution is different than a community-based institution. And a religious-based institution excludes myself and many others, all others except for the one that you are. And a community-based institution therefore allows for different points of view, different thought. And I think that I notice this often at conferences, at summits, in churches, in support groups, that there is a very the doors are open, but the same people are in the circle. And I think that the more integration of inviting people who don't have the same beliefs into the community, allowing there to be interfaith services or interfaith activities, or non-believers and believers, and the homeless population as a community, because I think that the religious portion of the church, and I'll do it in quotes, I'll also do it without quotes, church, the religious portion seems small. The biblical portion has become small. But I think what really you get out of church is community. What you get is connection. And that's something that is a lot more valuable as a currency than whether or not you believe something. I think that there's a lot more that we believe in that's the same than the few small things that are different. So what would really wow me is if there was an open door and an active reach toward, I mean, for everybody beyond the church, find one person you disagree with and discuss what happened today. And hear what they have to say about it. That's that community integration, whether it be a racism discussion or a religious discussion. Have a dialogue with someone you really do disagree with and accept both sides, and that's a great place to start. So I think that type of inclusion, less than the exclusion of what it tends to be, will be something that's pretty powerful.
What would wow me is, echoing everyone up here, would just be for the larger church, not just this one, to be more responsive to current events, even when denominational differences are palpable, and just standing for what's right when it's time for you to stand up for what's right. Because silence is complicity. And I don't think that the church fails at speaking up. I think they fail at speaking up too late. And if you're not going to speak up because you don't find it politically advantageous, just don't speak at all. And and what would wow me is to see one church, one organization, one denomination stand up for what's right at a given time. I don't know if Eternal General Sessions is Methodist, is he? Perfect. Great. Lots of opportunity. And I know that they're at the prayer breakfast of a Methodist pastor or reverend spoke out, but then got removed from the place. There is one gentleman who occupies one of the highest offices in the land that I feel the Methodist Church in particular has an opportunity to change the world's opinion thereof in this important moment. And that would wow me if it did so.
And on that note, thank you so much to our panelists, Drexel, Dakota, Tanya, Tyree, and Karmel. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Malynda. Let's hear from Malynda. Yes.